Hello, my name is Paulo Kogos. I'm making this video in English because it's directed to the foreigners who wants to know about the Brazilian political scenario. It's directed especially to Paul Joseph Watson, a conservative British YouTuber that requested a Brazilian, that speaks English of course, to talk about the contemporary Brazilian political panorama. And that's my video. Paul Joseph Watson is a great ally of mankind in its war against leftism. And you should listen to me, Paul Joseph Watson, because I am the only Brazilian YouTuber who defends both anarcho-capitalism and conservatism. To understand contemporary Brazilian political scenario, we need first to look to Brazilian history. Our history is quite different from the history of America, despite the fact that we were both colonies of European countries. Brazil has a strong Catholic root. Our first big event was a Catholic Mass. We were called the Land of the Holy Cross, Terra de Santa Cruz. And our first flag was the flag of the Order of the Cross of Christ. It's completely different from America, from which John Adams admits that they have no religious roots at all. People in Mayflower were fleeing from religious persecution. And once they established it here, their descendants started persecuting the native population themselves. So it was not a religious factor which molded the American civilization, but a political factor. There was no metaphysical unifying factor. It's completely different from Brazil. Just look at what happened to the native population in both countries. The American natives were persecuted by the government. Just look to General Custer or to Andrew Jackson. But here in Brazil, the Jesuits, the Company of Jesus, they brought civilization to the native population. They inserted them in the market and they prevented them to be enslaved by the state, by the crown, by the oligarchies. And then we have even a better treatment of the black slaves. Unfortunately, we had slavery here, the blacks. But even then, were better treated in the Catholic root countries than in countries such as Netherlands with Protestant roots. That's why in Brazil we had a big miscegenation, both biologically and culturally miscegenation, between these three great columns of our demographics today: the native population, the black population, and the European population. The Iberians are very gregarious. They created bonds easily with local people and people who live together with them. That happened in the senzalas, in the engenhos, that were the basic production unit of sugarcane in Brazil, and the whites and black people miscegenated. That's why we have no endemic racism in Brazil. That's completely different from United States. The Catholic Church strongly combats the heresy that black people have no souls. So we had a lot of black people freed from slavery with their own business. And if there is some racism today in Brazil, it's an invention of the democratic left trying to divide the population. The elites in Brazilian colony were also different from the elites in American 13 colonies. They acted as a civilizationary mediation. Once they were established in the hereditary captainies, and once they acquired land by the Sesmaria, I don't know how to speak that in English, system, they became local. And they act as a filter against the tyranny that always comes from the crown, not only Portuguese, but every crown, including the British. So we had a period in which Brazil was not a true colony, because we were not totally explored by the metropolis, by Lisbon. That's exactly the contrary of what they say in the mainstream history courses in the universities and the schools. Then Brazilian flourished. the elite fluctuated according to the markets, according to the cycle of commodities such as sugarcane, gold, coffee. We only started to become exploited when Illuminist ideas contaminated the European thinking. So Marquês de Pombal, Illuminist despot, started exploiting Brazil during the Iron Hand colonial era. But the United States didn't have that. They come direct from a true colony system to a republic with no natural aristocracy. In Brazil, we had a natural aristocracy formed. Just a parenthesis, there is a lot of computer genius here in Brazil. I would ask them to put Portuguese subtitles later. I don't know how the hell you do that, but you know. Well, there was also resistance against the crown in Brazil, such as the minutements in the United States. That's good. That's decentralization. That's accession. That's liberty. Good. São Paulo, where I live, was a province very prone to freedom. That's why we fought the Brazilian crown, the Portuguese crown, in the War of the Emboabas. The establishment never forgave São Paulo for that. They fear us. They fear our love of freedom. And I will say in this video that separatism is the only solution to Brazil. We had other separatist movements, we had independence movements, but they were contaminated by Illuminist thinking, such as the Minas Gerais Inconfidence, that were even used and distorted by the later Republican Illuminists. The fact is that the Brazilian colonial period started to end when Dom João VI, John VI, and his royal court came to Brazil fleeing from the Napoleonic invasions. That was 1802. Just to understand what the state always does, when they arrived in Rio de Janeiro, they started seizing property and expelling people to the streets to put their own royal courts in the buildings. And they put PR in the buildings, which means Prince Regent. We like to call it prédio roubado, which means robbed building. That's exactly what they do, and that's the contractualist mentality of the Iberic civilization, that despite being Catholic and conservative, they have no fully respect to private property. And that's an advantage of the United States. Despite the fact of being Masonic, Republicans, Illuminists, there is a culture of private property more developed in America than in Brazil. That's a big thing to explain the contemporary difference of economic development. Well, what happens during Dom João VI was ideologic bribery. Brazil is very Gregorian. They want to be part of something. That's part of our culture. We want to be part of something. Oh, really? Then Brazil is not a colony anymore. Brazil is a united kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and Algarve. Oh, no, that's fine. That's just a name. That's ideological bribery. They do that with us until today here in the Republic. Another cultural aspect of Brazil is that we don't make money as the Americans do. We like to earn money, easy money. So, when Dom João VI went back to Portugal, he decided to take the gold with him. And the Brazilians saw there an opportunity to seize this gold back. And they start chanting on the streets. Olho vivo, pé ligeiro, vamos a bordo buscar dinheiro. Eyes open, fast feet, let's go to the ships and seize the money back. Something like that. So, we like to seize easy money. That's another curse upon Brazil. Dom Pedro I, his son, he was supposed to go back to Portugal, but he stayed because he was influenced by the Freemasons. The Dia do Fico, this I Will Stay Day, was a Masonic supported event. And Dom Pedro I stayed here and went to São Paulo, to the Ipiranga, to proclamate the independence. Independence of or death. Why? Why São Paulo? As I said, São Paulo is prone to succession, to real freedom. He came here, Dom Pedro, to organize a repression against any attempt of São Paulo to separate from Brazil, and that's what he did in his whole reign, in his whole period, to repress any succession movement. The Ecuador Confederation, he executed Frei Caneca, almost a libertarian Catholic priest. He even tried to make Uruguay part of Brazil during the questions of the Rio de Plata, the Cisplatinus War. Thanks God, Uruguay and Argentina defeated us, and Uruguay is now an independent country, but it was not a complete defeat. Brazil was able, during the peace negotiations, to seize the missionary territories, Sete Povos das Missões, 7 peoples of the missions. Well, pure centralization, centralization and more centralization. And then we had his son, Dom Pedro II. There is a big conservative movement in Brazil, a monarchist movement, that they love the Orleans and Bragança family. They are so misguided. Dom Pedro II's reign was a disaster. I will explain you why. First, he was against the Catholic Church. He stayed as an allied. He allied himself with the Freemasons against the Catholic Church during the religious questions, even forbidding the formation of priests. And he promoted a massive migration of Protestants. I don't have problems with Protestants, but with massive migration. And Protestants were not part of the Brazilian original cultural matrix that was composed by natives, blacks from Africa, and Catholic Europeans. That was not part of the scheme. Mass migration is always bad. The worst of them is the Muslim. Well, another thing, he ended homestead. United States has a lot of capital and prosperity because of homestead. In Brazil, during Dom Pedro II, there was the law of the land of 1850, which prohibited any form of acquiring land except if you purchase the land from the government. Then we have a big agrarian issue here, and the leftists blame capitalism for that. Bullshit. Another thing, the Lei dos Entraves, the obstacle law, as I would translate that, when Dom Pedro II instituted a lot of red tape in Brazil, a bureaucratic regulatory empire, which resulted in the substitution of natural economic elites. They were replaced by a bureaucratic elite, a notarial fiefdom. Today, anything you want to do, every entrepreneur must spend a lot of time and energy to go to a notarial office to fill out paper shit. That's very bad to our economy. So, to understand what happened during the imperial period, we must look to the clientelism, another big cultural aspect of the Iberian civilization. We like to give privileges to friends. That's bad because it violates the natural rights of people who are not our friends. On the other hand, it's good because we protect the natural rights of our friends against positive law, against the expansion of the state power. Dom Pedro II kind of destroyed the good side of clientelism by promoting his friends against a natural elite. Big entrepreneurs, for example. I would say Barão de Mauá, but there were many others. The fact is that there is one thing that is even worse than the empire, and it's called republic. The Republic is even worse. Look at the empire. I don't like Dom Pedro II, but Brazil was as rich and has as much prestige as European countries, as America. Manaus in Amazon was called the Paris of the tropics. Rio de Janeiro, the imperial capital, was called the land of the pianos because we had a lot of high culture. Today we have funk. What happened? Damn, I hate the Republic. According to the historian Jorge Caldeira, we had more than 500,000 small and medium enterprises in Brazil. Industries, commerce. We were the fourth economy in the world. We had the second best military navy in the world, and we were the first in railroad construction. Railroads are excellent. But then came the goddamn Republic. Another Freemason plan. Well, why Republic? They were racist and they supported slavery. We abolished slavery in 1888 by a decree of Princess Isabel. She was a member of the royal family, that's true, but she was a good woman, maybe even a saint. And she abolished slavery. She didn't do that alone. We had a lot of abolitionists, Joaquim Nabuco, Chico da Matilde, and of course the Catholic Church. But the abolition enraged many sectors of society, which automatically started supporting a republic. They were called the Republicans of the May 13th, the day of the abolition. The Republic was a coup d'etat conducted by the Brazilian army. Let's look now to the history of the Brazilian army. They say that the origins of the Brazilian army remounts to the Battle of Guararapes, but dude, that happened in the 17th century against Netherlands. It was just a union of forces of many ethnicities, Indians, blacks, against the Netherlands invader. That has nothing to do with the racist, positivist, Masonic army that conducted the Republican coup. They were influenced. They were influenced by people like Augusto Conte, Benjamin Constant. Benjamin Constant was terrible. He introduced a lot of positivist ideas in the military ranks by his theory of not a citizen soldier such as in America, but a soldier citizen. A soldier that first complied to the rule of the Republic. That's another curse of Brazil. And then we had the military presidents. That's why this period is called the Republic of the Sword. It was terrible. The first president was Marechal Deodoro da Fonseca. During his government, we had the first big economic crisis. Encilhamento. Why the crisis happened? Ask an Austrian economist. Same thing as always. They don't learn from history. Visconde de Ouro Preto, a viscount in Brazil, created a primitive form of central banking, while Councillor Marinki passed a law in the middle of the night that authorized massive emission of public bonds and expansion of credit without saving. We had the first hyperinflation. The same story. The Austrian economists always get right, but they don't take them seriously. Why? Because the establishment controlled the universities, of course. Then we had the Floriano Peixoto, another military president. Floriano Peixoto was terrible. He supported a positivist politician called Júlio de Castilhos against a federalist revolution in the south. De Castilhos influenced a young man called Getúlio Vargas, which became the worst Brazilian ever born. I will talk about him later. Then we had Prudente de Moraes, a criminal. During Prudente de Moraes' government, we had Antônio Conselheiro, Anthony the Counselor. This is a great Brazilian hero, Antônio Conselheiro. He assembled a Catholic libertarian community, separatist, called the Canudos. And the Canudos bravely resisted 3 attempts of the Brazilian army to destroy them. Unfortunately, they brought heavy artillery, etc., and Prudente de Moraes and the army destroyed the Canudos community. More centralization. Afonso Pena started with another economic curse in the Brazilian thinking, that is the price control. During the Taubaté conventions, they decided to burn coffee to force the prices up. Price control. That wrecked our economy during the whole 20th century. And that's the legacy of the Old Republic. But there is even worse than the Old Republic. Getúlio Vargas onwards. But before Getúlio Vargas, let's look to the government of Artur Bernardes. During Artur Bernardes, we had a rebellion against the oligarchies. During the Old Republic, we had an alternation of power between the oligarchies of Minas Gerais and the oligarchies of São Paulo, coffee producers in São Paulo and milk producers in Minas. The tenentism was a rebellion of young officers, lieutenants and captains against this oligarchic system. But they were influenced by Illuminist, positivist, socialist, syndicalist ideologies, all the leftist crap, all the progressive crap. They rebelled and they merged all this ideological crap into a movement called Aliança Liberal, Liberal Alliance, suggestive name, which promoted Getúlio Vargas. Getúlio Vargas became a dictator in the new state of the 1930s, the 30 Revolution. Once again, São Paulo, we never surrendered, dude. We rebelled. The movement in 1932, the Constitutional Revolution. What Getúlio Vargas did? He put Brazilians to kill Brazilians. He invaded São Paulo. It was a big war, and unfortunately we lost. But we never surrendered. Getúlio Vargas destroyed the land of Holy Cross, the natural Brasility. He burned the flags of the provinces in a freaking pyre. And then he waved the satanic positivist flag of nowadays, Ordem e Progresso, Order and Progress, an Augusto Conte motto. His interventions against economic and individual freedoms are so massive that it would require a video alive just for that. I will not enter in this detail, but he was a communist son of a bitch. And he introduced the New World Order to Brazil by allying himself with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That's Getúlio Vargas. And the problem is the ghost of Getúlio Vargas, banned from paradise, but too much of a bitch to go to hell, keeps haunting Brazil until today, like Peronism haunts Argentina. Every single leader, every single political movement after Getúlio are Getulists. Even a thinker that people say is the most conservative thinker in Brazil, Olavo de Carvalho, he suffers from the disease of Getulism in his economic thought, in his economic thinking. After Getúlio Vargas, we had Juscelino Kubitschek. And Juscelino Kubitschek explored the short-sightedness of the Brazilian people who wants everything falling from heaven, everything easy, immediatism. Juscelino used to say, we need 50 years of development in 5. That's the same rhetoric of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the communist president who is in prison. He always say, growing plan, growth plan. Brazil now going to take off. You remember the Christ the Redeemer, like a rocket plummeting into the sky. Easy money, easy money, easy money. But they don't understand the economic basics. You must save to invest. You must work to consume. We don't get it, dude. Well, After Getúlio, the American Freemasons, who always try to destroy Brazil, gain a lot of influence. And that's true. The conservatives in Brazil like to praise America, but that's not true. There is a book about that, The American Delusion, from Eduardo Prado, and this book was banned by the Republicans. And if there is a president that was against the system, not aligned with Washington, was Jânio Quadros. He was forced to resign. And he said, I was forced to resign by strange forces. What the hell is strange forces? Well, you are all fans of Alex Jones. You know what's that. After that, we had a lot of presidents, but I will mention the most important, João Goulart. João Goulart was a communist, and he tried to implement a true communist, aligned with the Soviet Union regime in Brazil. He was prevented. He was prevented by the United States, General Lucius Clay. But look, that was not to save Brazil from communism. American Freemasons know how to think in the long term. And they knew that communism would never catch in a Catholic country such as Brazil, a strong Catholic country. Back there in the 60s, 95% of the population were devout Catholics. Today, then we had a military coup to prevent the communists. You can read about that in a book, The Suffocated Truth, Verdade Sufocada, of Colonel Ustra. He was a good soldier against terrorists and communists. But a military regime was implemented in 1964. We had the TFP, the Tradition, Family, and Property movement, that would never let communism to be implemented. We know the military dictatorship was a brilliant plan of the American Freemason to create an economic superstructure, interventionist, developmentist, Getulist superstructure that the left progressive Democrats of today use it to expand their own powers. And they were also useful to purge the name of the right-wing movements in Brazil. After the military dictatorship, being right-wing was the same of being an incel. You couldn't get any girl if you say you are a conservative and right-wing. You were demonized. Well, let's look to the military dictatorship. The first one was Castelo Branco, but he was not totally aligned with the United States, so he was killed. You're starting to get what happened to Bolsonaro, don't you? He was killed by Costa Silva and the CIA. It must look like an airplane accident. And the dictatorship started, actually, with Costa Silva and his Institutional Act number 5. Then we lost our economic freedoms, the few that we had, a lot of interventions. And a considerate amount of civil liberties were also lost, but not in the same amount as the extreme leftists used to say. There was a lot of communist, Marxist, Leninist, terrorist movements, exploding bombs, menacing civilians, trying to implement a communist dictator such as in Cuba. They were a menace and they must be dealt with force. That's true. The military dictatorship was bad, but the social democracy we live today is much worse. Well, a prominent figure in the dictatorship was Delfim Neto, a leftist economist that resembles a perverted pig. We had artificial growth during the Médici government, but it was artificial. Then we had, of course, a crisis, as the Austrian economics always warn us. And what was the measure of Delfim Neto? A maxi devaluation of the exchange rate with indexation of every economic indicators that haunts the Brazilian economy until today. And Delfim Neto is in the scenario until today. They don't die. They are like a plague. After the dictatorship ends in 1985, we had a president, elected president of Brazil, which example should be followed by every president. He died before taking office. Then we had Sarney and Collor with their crazy economic plans. Hyperinflation once again, price control that was perfect to be exploited by the Washington Convention. And they put in power a puppet of the New World Order called Fernando Henrique Cardoso. In my opinion, the worst president after Getúlio Vargas, even worse than Lula. Fernando Henrique pretended to combat the inflation as he was a Brazilian version of Gilmar Schacht. But what Fernando Henrique really did was to depleted our reserves, our strong currency reserves, making the Brazilian economy vulnerable to foreign shocks, foreign crises, such as the Asian crisis in 1998. And then the interest rates plummeted to the skies. Another crisis. And we have the dot-com crisis in 2001. Brazil was vulnerable to that as well. The Nasdaq crisis. What happened in 2002? The goddamn syndicalist called Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. A thief, a criminal, a murderer, a communist, a terrorist. 16 years of Partido dos Trabalhadores, the Labor Party, dictatorship. Social democracy is a dictatorship, even worse than the military. He wrecked Brazil morally, economically, socially, and politically. PT, the Labor Party, and the Social Democratic Party, they are blades of the same Leninist scissor. And the screw in the scissor is called PMDB, the Partido of the Democratic Movement. They all came from the MDB, the Democratic Movement, with origins in the dictatorship. Back there, we had two parties, Arena, more center, and MDB, left wing, composed by terrorists. By those Marxists, I said, they exploded bombs, they kidnap people, they assault banks. And all the political leaders of these parties are terrorist, deported communists such as Fernando Henrique, José Serra, Lula, Dilma, José Dirceu, Mário Covas, big political leaders, Montoro, Mota. And they are in power today, for Christ's sake. We have no right wing in Brazil. Lula got it right. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva got it right when he said there is no political right left in Brazil. And Bolsonaro got it right when he said that the mistake of the military dictatorship was to torture the communists and not killing them. That's why they are wrecking Brazil until today. Arena, the center party against MDB, evolved into the PDS, which evolved to the Progressist Party, the PP, which was the first party of Jair Bolsonaro. But as the name says, they are progressists. There is no political right. The first purge of the political right was with Getúlio Vargas. The second happened with the redemocratization. And now we have Dilma, that was literally a terrorist. We have Aloysio Nunes Ferreira, another robber, bank robber, train robber, terrorist. These people. Aloysio Nunes is from the PSDB. And we have now Michel Temer. Who is Michel Temer? Another Freemason, which promoted a final blow against Brazil with the immigration law. He opened Brazil to the Islamization, the same problem that Europe is facing now. We always said, poor Europe. They're being invaded by Islam. In Brazil, we have common robbers, we have a lot of poverty, but at least we don't have Islam. Now we have. The Islamic population is slowly growing here. Saudi Arabia is financing agents to Islamize Brazilian people. It's a minor problem for now. In the long term, it's a big problem. And the candidates, neither of them are saying a word about this. And it's Michel Temer and it's Lula to blame because our foreign policy was always of support to Hamas and another terrorist groups in Palestine. We are the only Western country to have a Hamas embassy, and that happens during Luiz Inácio government. That's the kind of shit we are facing today. Well, before entering in the actual elections, let's look to some Brazilian aspects. We are adventurous people. Adventurous. That's a term used by Sérgio Buarque de Holanda in his book, The Roots of Brazil. The adventurous people are different from the hardworking people because adventurous want easy money. I said about that. They don't want to establish themselves and work slowly, diligently, but at the same time, they take a lot of risks. That's why the Portuguese people launched themselves into the big navigations. That's why the Paulista, the São Paulo Bandeirantes, launched themselves to explore riches in the jungles, expanding our territory. I would say that there are two aspects of the adventure characteristics, the good and bad. The bad is because we don't have institutions to protect private property and other economic features that would give us prosperity in the long term. On the other hand, we adventurers can be good resistance, good rebels against the system. Because the working people, such as the British and the Americans, they protected the legalist institutions without rebelling against as they should. And in Brazil, we are prone to rebellion against these very institutions because we are adventurers. Why we don't rebel? Why? Because politics take a step ahead of us. They promise things. I will give you everything you want. Just trust me, say the politicians. And then we put our weapons down and trust the worst kind of people in the world, politicians. How the hell do you trust politicians? Then we should find another explanation in another Brazilian historian called Mary Del Priore. Mary Del Priore say the Brazilian people, they don't seek pleasure. They seek the sensation of taking advantage of the pleasure. We want a nominal pleasure. We prefer less actual pleasure if we have more pleasure than we were supposed to have. That's a terrible way of thinking. That's to be combated by Catholicism. We need to be more Catholics. That's the point. But Brazil is that man that go to the prostitutes, spend his money, have a lot of pleasure, but after he became sad. Brazil is sad. Brazil has some kind of intermediate sadness because we are not really depressed. We still have our Catholicism. And we are happy during Carnival. But during the days, during the months, during the end of the months, we are sad people. They used to say, I think it was the ancient Rome physician that said, post coitum animalis tristis, mitigalus qui cantat. After coitum, the animal became sad, except the rooster, who sings. Now, Brazil is in a perennial sexual intercourse with themselves. They don't stop this to work, to rebel. Well, that take us to our current political scenario. I talked about the purge of the right. Even Aeneas was considered a conservative politician against the system, against the Illuminatis, against the freaking New World Order. But even him was contaminated by the Jesuit way of thinking. He followed an economist called Adriano Benayon, which still promoted a developmentist, protectionist economic policy. We are cursed by an anti-capitalist mentality. Well, and then we have the natural law. Everything the progressives do to destroy us, to destroy the family, to promote gender ideology, to take away our weapons. Fernando Henrique did that. Sometimes, eventually, it crushes against the natural law. And Brazilian people are more prone to obey the natural law and to become counter-revolutionaries than Sweden, than France. You know that. You talk about that a lot in your YouTube channel, Paul Joseph Watson. And the natural law was so much violated in the world that we had a right-wing Renaissance phenomenon, and the way of people saying, we are tired of being robbed. We are tired of these leftist, perverted pedophiles perverting our families. We are tired of socialists. We are tired of Islamic invasion. The way people express this feeling is Salvini in Italy, is Marie Le Pen in France, is Orbán in Poland, it's Wild Geertz in Netherlands, and it's Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro has a lot of problems, but he is the way Brazilian people found to express their revolt against the progressive system, against New World Order. And Bolsonaro is a fruit of the ending of a cycle of progressive fascism that wrecked Brazil. We had economic cycles, boom and bust. We had political cycles, and Bolsonaro is in the end of these cycles, emerging as the least leftist of the candidates. I don't consider him right-wing. The problem is, should we vote for Jair Bolsonaro? I still don't know the answer because politicians make everything a conundrum. The problem is that there is another candidate called Fernando Haddad, and he's almost like the Antichrist himself. Fernando Haddad is from the Labour Party. He is an intellectual of the Frankfurt School, and he was one of the worst mayors of my city ever. He wants to implement socialism, literally. He wants to destroy the family. He even gave pornography to small children in the school. He wants to raise taxes, to regulate the economy even more. This guy would destroy Brazil. Some people say, well, but at least if Fernando Haddad becomes president, we have a chance of another military intervention. That's true. But who said military intervention would be good? I told you about the military dictatorship. They are the guardians of positivist thinking. They are Freemasons. The problem of Jair Bolsonaro is that his vice president is a military Freemason, is a general, General Mourão. But if General Mourão is bad, the kind of military intervention we would have with Haddad would be even worse. And it would be even worse with no military intervention at all with Fernando Haddad elected. Because we would have the Frankfurt School and communism in Brazil. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva already supported the socialist dictators in Venezuela, in Africa, in Cuba, maybe even in North freaking Korea. We don't want that in Brazil. So should we vote to Bolsonaro? I don't know. Bolsonaro is bad. I don't like him. But people are supporting him as a political messiah. The same mistake that the poor people who voted for the Labour Party did by considering Lula as an economic messiah. There is no such a thing as a secular messiah. The only messiah is Jesus. But they still think that they're going to be some kind of savior. I don't look to the problem that way. Yes, I hope Bolsonaro wins. But if Bolsonaro wins, he will not save anything. He will not save shit. It will be a brief period of time for the Brazilian people to rest, to accumulate money, strong currency, to rearm themselves, and keep fighting against the enemy, the state, the republic, the democracy. Bolsonaro is more of the same problem. He supports democracy. He's a unionist. And so he supports the very roots of our problem, which I call the most false trinity, not most holy trinity. The most false trinity is democracy, equality, and unionism. Nobody talks about separatism. Nobody talks about how inequality is good and how democracy is the root of evil. That's the problem. I was thinking about not voting, but then I saw that George fucking Soros, is supporting a big movement against Jair Bolsonaro. Not him. Ele não. The establishment is trembling, maybe. It would be like Trump and Hillary. Of course, I supported Trump. I prayed the rosary, asking God to defeat Hillary. But I don't like Trump. He's more of the establishment. We must assume a posture of an attitude of political guerrilla. We are in a war, the state against the people. Guerrilla is to win the war by unconventional means. Okay, if Bolsonaro wins is better than Haddad, then we will reorder ourselves financially, militarily, and keep fighting. That's my position. I don't know if I'm going to vote. If I do, it's against Haddad, not supporting Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro is from a party called PSL, Partido Social Liberal, the Social Liberal Party. Social Liberal Party was taken by assault by a group of progressive leftist pedophiles called livres, free, another euphemism. But the free were expelled from the party when Jair Bolsonaro asked to join. And now PSL is becoming more conservative. They support the prohibition of abortion, family values. That's good. But economically, they are still against what could save us. Anarcho-capitalism, weapons to the people, and separatism. Then there is Partido Novo, the new party, another euphemism, with his candidate João Amoedo. João Amoedo is evil. He's a phony candidate, who says that he defends free market, but as a matter of fact, he is a candidate of the United Nations agenda and the banksters agenda, Itaú and his New World Order leaders, the Setúbals. There was one candidate in Partido Novo that supported tanks, war tanks to the farmers. That would be great. That would be a blessing. And this man, I don't recall his name, he was expelled from Partido Novo. That's what I say. Don't trust them. And then we have Ciro Gomes. Ciro Gomes is an evil man. Ciro Gomes support Keynesian, extreme Keynesian policies that would bring hyperinflation back to Brazil. Why do people vote to Ciro Gomes? Why do they commit this big mistake? Don't they learn anything from the past? Ciro Gomes is from PDT, a syndicalist party. And PDT always put the employer against the employee, wrecking our social tissue. Why would they support such a man? To understand this phenomenon, we must look to the origins of Ciro Gomes. He is the fruit of a hybrid political cradle, so to speak. He has a coronelist root. Coronels were aristocratic elite in the Northeast that profits from the misery of the Northeast people. But they don't act alone. They act along with the metropolitan elites of São Paulo, the Fiesp, for example, which lobby the central government to regulate the economy even more, making it not viable for the entrepreneur to invest cheap capital in the Northeast. That's the origin of Ciro. At the same time, he has an innovative, progressive speech, like a macho version of a social justice warrior. That's crazy. So, is the way the political status quo find to improve the speech in order to avoid a counter-revolution. That's Ciro Gomes. And then we have Alckmin. Alckmin from the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats destroyed the public security in my state. Alckmin is part of that. Alckmin is even worse than that. He's a false Christian, and he is an ally of the worst criminal gang in São Paulo, the PCC, the first command of the capital. They are murderers, kidnappers, rapists, organized crime. And Geraldo Alckmin, during his government as a governor of São Paulo, made PCC grow as an empire. No Christian should vote for him. The Social Democrats are there as part of the game to make a confusion in the political spectrum. They are between the extreme left and a neoliberal way of thinking. Geraldo Alckmin, is at the same time allies of the PSB party, which are the Socialist Brazilian Party, and the MBL, the Movement for a Free Brazil. Movement of Free Brazil are traitors. They gather right-wing people and make them say that they are against separatism, for example. And Geraldo Alckmin is in the middle as a one-size-fits-all politician. Don't vote him. He's an ideological candidate disguised as a non-ideological candidate. Then we have the extreme left, the Operário Caos Party, the Communist Party, the United Works Party. Some of them are more Trotskyists, others are more Leninists, they all suck. And we have Marina Silva. Marina Silva is an environmentalist crazy bitch. She's always saying about regulating the economy because of global warming and bullshit like that. She would be a eco-fascist Hegelian agent. She would be the synthesis of Marxist thinking in Brazil and New World Order bankster policy with this environmental excuse. Don't vote for her anyway. And we have Henrique Meirelles. Who the hell is Henrique Meirelles? Henrique Meirelles is another bankster criminal. He was a minister. He was a big figure and Bank Central director during Lula government. But he is considered right-wing in this crazy country. Why the hell did the leftists accept Henrique Meirelles during Lula government? Simple. Because Lula promised to the syndicate, to the labor unions, that they would keep their syndicalist labor unionist privileges. And so Henrique Meirelles, by his mere existence, helped to keep the Pelegism in Brazil, the unholy alliance between government and labor unions. Henrique Meirelles was not good for the economics. He postponed the crisis, hiding under a period in which the dollar was being devaluated by Bush and Obama administrations, under dollar relative weakness. And then he promoted an increase in taxation, which is his flag until today, which make Brazil vulnerable to the credit expansion crisis. That's why we are so depleted today. The Labor Party, Henrique Meirelles, all these criminals destroy the Brazilian happiness. The cities are abandoned, the nightlife, even the nightlife is decreasing. We used to be like Irish people, always partying, always happy. Even that is disappearing. We can't stand them anymore. That's why I think Bolsonaro is the least of evils. But do not become fanatics. Don't say Bolsomith or something like that. He's your enemy as well. If you vote for him, do it strategically. But don't ever forget that maybe not voting at all and not supporting democracy can often be a better strategy. Well, let's talk about the knife. They stabbed Bolsonaro. Who stabbed Bolsonaro? Adelio fucking shit. The establishment did. Because the establishment knows that if Bolsonaro wins, we will have a time to breathe. Maybe it would be even worse in the long term if we don't exploit the situation. But that's not new in Brazil. During the second term of Getúlio Vargas, there was a journalist, a conservative journalist, that criticized Getúlio Vargas heavily. His name was Carlos Lacerda, an anti-establishment journalist, and they tried to kill him in the crime of Rua Toneleiro streets. During that time, Air Force Major, called Major Vaz, was killed, and Carlos Lacerda was wounded but survived. It's not the first time that happens. That's the problem of Brazil. We are under establishment attack. Brazil is facing a political chaos. We are living a political chaos. And I would say that we are reviving a new tenantism movement. Why tenantism? Why military? Because war and politics have a lot of common aspects. They are chaos. What's military science about? To organize chaos. That's why the military are the best people to organize political chaos, but that's bad for us. They are organizing the enemies of the people. That's why I don't like them. That's why I think they are dangerous. And by building a monolithic structure, unionist structure, which the excuse of increasing order, diminishing entropia, they make a fool of the people. We think the state is on our side, and that order within the state is better for us. I would like my enemy to be disorganized. The problem is democracy. Always anticipate itself. It's interesting. Sometimes political oligarchies organized against the establishment to protect their local interests. But the system, they make a kind of arrangementation of these local elites to work within the system. They always take a step ahead of the market and simulate the market. Yes, we should take arms and destroy the establishment. But the system is faster than us. They put Bolsonaro there, simulating what the market should do. And what we should do, we should anticipate and reclaim. That's my theory. Anticipate and reclaim. Do charity before the welfare demagogy, before the welfare hypocrites do. Arm yourselves before the government authorize. Educate your children before some communist piece of shit do that in the public schools. Anticipate and reclaim. I will come closer to the window because of the light. Okay. Okay. That's good. Don't pray to a false god. Democracy is a false god. And as a false god, he uses everything it can to keep as being the status quo. The true God uses everything to our salvation. Democracy uses everything to our damnation. And we in Brazil keep thinking that we must have order before morality. That's a big mistake. Morality comes before everything. And order is the daughter of morality. What's the solution to Brazil? Separatism. We should be united by religious, cultural, economic, commerce, free commerce aspects, not political. And we need another Guararapes. We need another battle in which all repressed people, employers, employees, farmers, workers, should united against the establishment. That's my perspective, Paul Joseph Watson and every other person who is watching. I will end the transmission now, and I hope you enjoy it. 1 hour of video, but I hope it helps.